So thank you all so much for joining us. We are hosting this event to uplift the leadership of women in the labor movement while also creating space to discuss some of the challenges that remain. My name is Liz Medina, and I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Labor Council, AFL-CIO, and we are proud to be hosting this event this evening. So women serving as top officers of AFL-CIO State Federations in New England were invited, and it is a great honor to have some of them here with us this evening, as well as a very special guest, Sara Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, part of the Communication Workers of America, AFA-CWA. So more women are leading labor councils in New England than ever before, and this is only the beginning of a conversation. If you would like to hear from more women leading labor councils, including area labor federations and central labor councils, which are subsidiary organizations of state federations, please do let us know in the evaluation. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the link for the evaluation right now, and I'll drop it again later, because we really do want to make sure these events are as relevant as possible to you. So in the meantime, I'm also going to ask you all to share some of your union pride. So you can rename yourself by going to either your image in the gallery view and clicking the 3 horizontal dots in the upper right corner and clicking on that, and an option to rename will appear, or you can click on participants if you hover your cursor over your Zoom screen, and you will see your name in a list of participants, and you can also access those 3 little dots from there to rename yourself. So as you can see, I have put my union. I'm also a member of UAW 2322 while I serve the Labor Council. So I have UAW, Liz in front of my name. And I invite you all to take a moment to do the same. And no worries if you're not in a union yet. This is why we're having these kinds of events. Okay. All right, well, I will get started while you continue to rename yourselves or drop your union pride in the chat. So it's amazing. First of all, I do see a lot of union members here, so it's so amazing to see so many coming together. Before I let our esteemed panelists take things away, I'm going to briefly share the structure of the evening together. So each panelist will have 5 minutes to share a bit about why they decided to lead an AFL-CIO Labor Council, what barriers they faced as a woman in the labor movement, and how can labor councils develop more women as leaders. Then there will be 30 minutes for questions from you, the audience. And there are 2 ways you can ask questions. You can either write your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Both of these functions are available. If you hover your cursor over your Zoom screen, you will find the chat icon or the reactions icon that will have the option to raise your hand if you click on it. If you do not see the option for raise hand in the reactions, it may be in the more options. So I will ask that just so I can keep track of all the questions to please refrain, however, from asking questions until the panelists are done with their presentations. I don't want to miss your question, and it could be hard to scroll back and sort through all that. So I appreciate you holding that. I know sometimes questions pop up when someone's speaking. Grab a piece of paper or your phone or something and write that down. And of course, you can ask questions directly to a specific panelist if you like, or a broad question, and then our panelists can decide who wants to answer that. And if you don't want to answer that particular question, panelists, then you do not have to. If you need additional support this evening, we have 2 people joining us that can help out and are going to be helping to monitor the chat. So thank you so much for that. It's hard to keep track of a lot of things all at once. We have Jeremy Rathbun joining us, and you can find him in the participant panel. And we also have Andy Blanchett. Jeremy Rathbun is a steward of AFSCME 1201. That's the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And Andy Blanchett is the president of AFSCME 1674, which is Howard Center workers. So after the Q&A section, each panelist will have 1 to 2 minutes for a closing statement. So now that you understand how we're going to spend the evening together, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists. Ellen Kaye is the executive director of the Vermont, or not the executive director, that's me, of the executive vice president of the Vermont State Labor Council, and she's a library cataloger at the University of Vermont. She was a founding member of UVM Staff United, which organized in 2021. In 2022 of May, she won her first contract with her coworkers and was elected co-president in September of 2022. She grew up on a steady diet of labor songs and stories fed to her by her union teacher mom. We also have Shellye Davis. She is the secretary treasurer of the Connecticut AFL-CIO. For the last 2.5 years, Shellye has served as the secretary treasurer of the Connecticut AFL-CIO, the first Black woman in history to hold this position. She is a paraeducator with over 25 years of experience in public education and proudly serves as president of Hartford Federation of Paraeducators Local 2221. Danielle Bombardier is an electrician with IBEW Local 300. She worked as an organizer and training director for IBEW Local 300 and currently teaches electrical trades at a high school technical center. She was elected secretary treasurer in 2019. Cynthia Phinney is the president of the Maine AFL-CIO and a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Before getting a union job and joining IBEW, she worked as a hand sewer in a shoe factory in Maine and was active in the Maine chapter of the National Organization for Women, or NOW. She also plays the fiddle and grows culinary herbs and flowers. Katherine, or Katie, Maurice is president of the Vermont AFL-CIO and member of AFSCME 1674. Howard Center's Workers Union, where she works full-time as a teaching interventionist. And of course, we have a very special guest. Hopefully it's still joining us this evening. Her flight was delayed, but she's going to try to make it at the end. Sara Nelson, president of the AFA-CWA and a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. Sara first became a union member in 1996 when she was hired as a flight attendant at United Airlines. Today, she represents 50,000 of aviation's first responders at 20 airlines. The New York Times called her America's most powerful flight attendant for her role in ending the 35-day government shutdown, which included calling for a general strike should it come to it. That same year, In Style magazine placed her on the top 50 badass woman list. So President Nelson also serves on the AFL-CIO Executive Council. So again, each panelist will have 5 minutes to present before audience Q&A. I'm going to set a timer and hold up my hand as so to indicate when you have reached 5 minutes. I'm going to allow each panelist up to a minute more to finish their thoughts before asking them to conclude and move on to the next panelist. So Executive Vice President Ellen Kaye, would you please share a bit about why you decided to lead the Vermont State Labor Council, what barriers you may have faced as a woman in the labor movement, and how can labor councils develop more women as leaders?
Hi, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. As Liz introduced me, I'm Ellen Kaye. I live in Barre, Vermont. I'm proud to serve as the Executive Vice President and of the Vermont State Labor Council, as well as the co-president of my local UVM Staff United. So when my union organized starting in the fall of 2019, all the way through our election and our campaign to win our first contract in the spring of 2022, the Vermont State Labor Council was there, showing up to rallies and marches, making trainings available to affiliates about how to build power together, running worker circles where organized and yet to be organized workers provide mutual support to build our labor movement in Vermont. So when I was asked to stand for executive vice president, I said yes for two reasons. I deeply valued the approach that the Vermont State Labor Council had taken to build and strengthen the Vermont labor movement from the inside out and from the bottom up by organizing and supporting locals and new organizing. And I wanted to ensure that it would continue and flourish in this direction. And second, I was excited about the prospect of a 3-woman executive team for the first time in Vermont history. My enthusiasm wasn't just theoretical. I had been living it for 3 years in my own union. As a member of our leadership team at UVM Staff United, I had seen what a team of women can do in the labor movement. For 3 years, we've been building a strong and engaged union, a fighting union that trains the boss every day. Being a leader means being willing to do the work, a lot of work, and stepping up to the tremendous responsibility to be entrusted to represent and work for my colleagues. I realized that the picture of a solitary leader who is endowed with some kind of magical power is a myth. I am in the company of a team that is energetic, disciplined, organized, and brilliant, and we egg each other on every day. I see my role as a leader as building and nurturing more leaders. That's my prime directive. More and more workers who come to understand collective power, who move from I to we, who experience what solidarity truly feels like at work and in their lives outside of work, who experience the joy of fighting alongside someone else, even if it's not their own personal fight. So I'm not in it for some kind of status or personal power. Mostly it's just really exhausting, but pretty amazing also. But I do want to be a model for what confidence and power look like in women's leadership, so that many, many more women and those socialized as female can see themselves stepping up. Many of the barriers that I have faced have been internal. Those are the hardest ones. The voices that tell us from a tender age that we can't, that we're not smart enough, that we're not strong enough, that we should stay small and not take up too much space, that we should defer to others. When I agreed to serve in these leadership roles, I found that I had to talk back to those deeply ingrained ideas in order to fully step up to the awesome responsibility I had embraced, but it was worth it. And then there are the external barriers. We'll probably hear a lot about those tonight. You know, I've encountered people who can't seem to register women's voices, maybe too high, I don't know what it is, but just don't hear when women speak, figuratively and literally. People who perceive maybe there's a power vacuum if the person in charge is not who they expect it to be, who assume that their ideas must be better. Those lists go on and on. But I want to talk about our leadership. So I'm finding that a non-male leadership model looks a lot more like collaboration, mutual support, and cooperation than the dominance and authoritarianism that have been the hallmark of top-down structures. And it's become clear to me that many folks can mistake this kind of leadership as weakness, because encouraging participation and input, admitting you don't know everything, and stepping back so that others can step up can be misread as a lack of competence or skill, because we're used to a much different model of power. People socialized as female, like myself, learn from a young age to cooperate and collaborate. We're taught to have empathy, to consider the needs of those around us. Although this training has often kept us from stepping into leadership with boldness and confidence, The flip side is that bringing these skills to labor leadership, along with a newfound boldness and confidence, has the potential to build a whole different kind of power, one that lifts all boats and builds relationships that keep those boats afloat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. You came right in at time. Really appreciate your beautiful and succinct presentation there. So Secretary Treasurer Shellye Davis, would you please go next and share a bit about why you decided to lead the Connecticut AFL-CIO Labor Council, what barriers you faced as a woman, but also maybe as a person of color, and how can labor councils develop more diverse leaders and women leaders?
Thank you, Liz. Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to share my journey as a Black woman, a woman of color in the labor movement. It's a privilege to stand up for those whose voices are often silenced. And so join me and explore my experiences and insights on women's leadership in the labor movement. I decided to run for the Labor Council. That question resonates deeply with me. I felt a calling to lead, to champion the unrepresented, to fight for equality, and to uphold what is just. Together, we can forge a more inclusive and vibrant labor movement that embraces diversity and empowers all voices. In the words of Hattie Canty, the union taught me how to fight for what I needed and what I had, and if it was something I wanted, and how to go after it. Reflecting on the obstacles that I encountered as a Black woman, a woman of color in the labor movement, invokes a range of emotions. Overcoming biases, stereotypes, and subtle discrimination has been very challenging, a very challenging journey. Yet through resilience, solidarity, and embracing our differences, we can shatter those barriers and advance towards a more fair and compassionate movement. I know barriers can be broken because with a lot of help and the confidence of workers in labor, I was able to become the first Black woman of color, to be the Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. So not only do I know, I believe progress can be made when we work together. How can the labor councils cultivate more women as leaders? This is a pivotal question. I believe that labor councils must prioritize supporting all women, particularly those from diverse backgrounds, by providing mentorship, tailoring programs, and eliminating impediments to progress. We can cultivate a new generation of women leaders who embody the richness of our communities. I would like to thank and recognize women who were instrumental in mentoring me, and they include my grandmother, who's no longer with us, but my mother, Alice Davis, and Lori Pelletier, who helped me get on the path to be where I am at AFL-CIO, and Peggy Buchanan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shellye. Let's hear it for Secretary Treasurer Davis. All right, so next up we have Secretary Treasurer Danielle Bombardier. So Danielle, you're up. Would you please share with us a bit about why you decided to lead the Vermont State Labor Council for multiple terms, and what barriers you face as a woman in the labor movement, perhaps also in the trades, and how can labor councils develop more women as leaders?
Thank you, Liz. I did approach my 5 minutes a little bit differently, and I'm not directly answering questions, but to prepare for this, I've been asking myself, how did I get here? I remember when I was about 13, I filled out an online astrology report where I entered my exact day and time of birth, and it spit out strengths and weaknesses and potential matches for careers. And union leader happened to be one of those career paths. So I guess it's been in the stars that I would be here with all of you tonight. However, I won't discount all the work that I have done to be where I am today, as women often do. I grew up low income in a divorced household in Vermont. There was definitely the work hard and it will pay off, typical self-sufficient Vermonter attitude in my home life. I had a strong sense of fairness as a kid, maybe because I'm the middle child, and I was very independent. I wanted to be able to do the things my brothers did, but better. We were a competitive family, but also very supportive. I went to college, and as I got closer to graduation, I had to answer the dreaded question of what I was doing with my life. I started to feel strongly that whatever I chose for work had to align with my values. I abandoned my major, but found my voice and place within the women's movement. I have realized that I'm the type of person who is constantly learning and getting involved in different causes or work that gives me purpose. I would say my values center around cooperation, relationships, empowering myself and others, and creating systems that work for people with an emphasis on bottom-up change. And my childhood sense of fairness developed into a value system based in equity. After college, I stumbled across an advertisement for a program called Step Up to Electrical, run by an amazing organization, Vermont Works for Women. I decided it was time to learn some hard skills, and I knew that as a woman in the electrical trade, I was breaking barriers, which I loved. I fell in love with the program. It was run by women, taught by women, and was incredibly empowering. It strengthened my independence and confidence and showed me that things that I didn't know I was capable of doing. And lucky for me, this program was partnered with training through the IBEW. I started working as an IBEW electrical apprentice. Previously, I had been working 2 to 3 jobs to live on my own, and now I only had to work 1 job to pay my bills. So I had all this extra free time. Naturally, I got involved with the union, attending union meetings and wellness events, volunteering and teaching. When my daughter was starting kindergarten, I applied for an open position with the IBEW. At the time, it was hard to work construction around a school schedule. So I put down my tools in order to make things work for my family. I missed it, but I focused on the opportunity to build relationships in the community and with other labor leaders, and began to learn how to navigate the world of labor. I finally felt like I was part of a system that supported, empowered, and benefited people. Simultaneously, I was very aware that I was a woman in a non-traditional career. There were very few women at IBEW district meetings or construction conferences, which was challenging and intimidating at times. While my local was incredibly supportive, it was difficult to navigate the organization on a higher level, and I often felt out of place. There wasn't anyone I could look to who looked like me for support. There were even fewer women who were working in the field as electricians alongside me. And I had to prove that I was capable of getting the job done. I didn't mind this as much. I know how to work hard, and I accepted the challenge. However, helping me to manage this type of environment was the mentorship and support of women who came through the Step Up program with me, who became good friends. I took the opportunity to run and was elected Secretary Treasurer 5 years ago. I had the support of the IBEW, the Vermont Building Trades Council, and the running president. I had gained some bookkeeping and benefit admin experience, and I was getting involved with more political work through the IBEW at the time. I always have in mind that representation is important. I am proud and excited to work as a woman at this level in the labor movement. Starting 3 years ago, as Liz had mentioned, I began teaching electrical full-time for a high school technical center, where I am also involved in bringing more female and female identifying youth into the trade. I am empowering my students to change the construction culture to be more inclusive. I hold them to a high standard and hope that they go into the labor force with a strong sense of what makes a workplace safe, healthy, and productive for all workers. This is my role as a labor leader and an educator in my field. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Treasurer Bombardier. Let's hear it for Danielle. All right, wonderful. So up next, we have President Cynthia Phinney. So President Cynthia Phinney, would you please share a bit about your journey leading the main AFL-CIO Labor Council, what barriers you faced as a woman in the labor movement, and how can labor councils develop more women as leaders? Take it away.
Thank you, Liz. And it's really wonderful to be here with all of you and to have the opportunity to think about this and reflect on it. I wanted to start with a little bit of just background. How I ended up here, I think, is sort of how someone else phrased it. I was born in 1957, which meant I grew up in the 60s. My parents were marginally involved in the civil rights movement. And of course, in the 1960s, there were just examples everywhere of people taking action, often collective action, to change things that they saw that weren't right in the world. And so that was the atmosphere around me as I was figuring out what's the world about, what's my place in it. I have to say that at that time, I always saw myself as a person in the masses, a person in the march, a person that was part of the crowd that made the collective action. I did not see myself as someone that was leading that crowd. That was a transformation over many years through many opportunities that I either stumbled into or that people offered to me. I became active in my union the minute I got a union job, and ultimately ended up on staff as an organizer and then served 2 terms as an elected business manager, which is a rare thing in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So I'm very proud to have served that for 2 terms. And after 2 terms, I lost an election by 4 votes and went back to my job with the tools for 5 years. I think the fact that I didn't leave the labor movement when that happened, as many people do when they lose an election, was part of what built the respect that I had that served me when I decided to run for this position. And I ran for this position because it needed to be done. And I realized that it included most of the things that I loved most when I was the business manager of my union, and I'd get to do it with a whole lot of unions. So that was exciting. You know, barriers, the internal voices were mentioned. I think those are a really big one. And then there are things that happen in the world that reinforce those voices. Especially when I was running, I noticed how many men called me honey, darling. These are men who respect me, you know, who like me and respect me. They mean no disrespect, but it's just such a habit. And when you hear those things, when those things come in, they bring up all those internal voices that say that you're insignificant and small. Also, the first time I ran, I learned that one of the members of one of our large affiliates had declared that we don't need a woman to run this organization. And in a more recent election, I'm told that someone said I was too touchy-feely. I've been described as reserved, so I think the touchy-feely comes from being female and running discussion groups more than anything that might actually be touchy-feely. But those kind of things happen. We get judged for those things really differently often if people perceive us as female. So, and there are things like when I stand up to call a convention to order or whatever, I have to work really hard to get people's attention. And I noticed that most of the men don't. And I spoke sternly to my executive board about that after a COPE convention where it happened. I had to get a man up to start the meeting, and that just should not ever happen. And I felt really proud of myself for taking the executive board to task for that and received an apology from one who said, I was one of those men and I will never do it again. So, I think I also have mostly worked in male-dominated fields for most of my adult working life. And so I think a lot of the things that are barriers kind of roll off me, and I often don't even notice them. But to move into your final question, I was recently asked by a young woman who was moving into a job where she'd be working with a lot of men, how I did it. So I'd had a chance to reflect on that even before you invited me to this panel, Liz. And I think spaces away from the dominant culture are important for anyone who's part of a constituency that's been marginalized or disrespected, a place to try out our wings in a place that's going to be less judgmental, where the standards will be different and we can try out being ourselves. that's one of the beauties of the constituency groups within the AFL-CIO, if they're functioning as they should. And mentorship is really important. I've had some of that. I've had the honor to offer some of that to other women. I've seen the importance that it makes when someone with more experience can provide support and guidance and help another leader to grow and become. And also just looking at the array of diversity or the lack of it when choosing speakers for events or opportunities to offer to people. So I'll rest there. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Let's hear it for President Cynthia Phinney. Okay. So up next, we have President Kaye Maurice. So Kaye, would you please share a bit about why you decided to become president of the Vermont State Labor Council and your journey there? What barriers you faced as a woman in the labor movement, and how can labor councils develop more women as leaders?
Thank you, Liz, and good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to speak with you and among a group of badass labor leaders tonight. My name is Kaye Maurice. I am president of the Vermont AFL-CIO, working full-time as a teaching interventionist at a Howard Center and a rank and file member of AFSCME 1674. And in just a few weeks, I will also be a mother. Now, look, despite our significant contributions to the workforce and our communities, women continue to face numerous obstacles on their path to participation, let alone leadership in the labor movement. From entrenched gender biases to systemic barriers, we encounter a host of challenges when we dare to run for leadership roles within the labor movement, and God forbid we win. We confront skepticism about our abilities, discrimination in male-dominated spaces, and the often overlooked burden of unpaid labor that prevents many women from having the time and capacity to lead the charge. These obstacles are not just daunting, they're downright infuriating. As part of the Vermont AFL-CIO's first all-women executive committee, I recognize that our labor movement in Vermont has taken an important step. Historically, it's been difficult for women to participate in the labor movement, let alone hold positions of leadership. It's not lost to us that childcare is a huge barrier to participation. So those of us on the United Slate decided to do better. We began the practice of hiring unionized early childhood educators at our labor council conventions to make it easier for women and young families to participate. Look, it's no secret that women are paid less, have fewer resources, are in less privileged positions of power, and have to work harder to get by. However, we've seen a recent resurgence in the labor movement that is being led mostly by women in industries that are disproportionately staffed by women, such as food service, healthcare, and social services. The labor movement cannot afford to sideline or silence half of its potential leaders. It's time that we have a seat at the table. Having women in leadership roles isn't a matter of tokenism or political correctness. It's a matter of survival for the labor movement. As Ellen mentioned earlier, women bring invaluable skills to the table: empathy, collaboration, and resilience in the face of adversity. We understand the struggles of women firsthand and can advocate for policies and initiatives that uplift and empower all workers. But it's not just about what women bring to the table. It's also about what happens when we're excluded from it. When women are shut out of leadership roles, we see policies and decisions that fail to address the unique challenges faced by women in the workforce, from pay inequity to lack of access to affordable childcare. We see a movement that claims to fight for dignity and working class power, yet perpetuates the very power structures it seeks to eradicate. I ran for president because I felt strongly about continuing the efforts and gains made by our State Labor Council since the United Slate was elected in 2019. Since then, our Labor Council has no longer been a surefire vote for any political party. Rather, we've held high standards for any political candidate's request for endorsement. We've doubled our membership from 10,000 to 20,000 members, and we've put our resources to good use by investing in on-call organizers and effective trainings to support our affiliates. I saw an opportunity to continue the struggle to build working class power in Vermont. So what can we do to ensure that women have a seat at the table in the labor movement? We can start by advocating for policies and practices that promote accessibility at all levels of the labor movement. We need policies in place that support families, such as paid family leave, and accommodate the unique challenges faced by working women with family responsibilities. Look, the challenges we face when taking on leadership roles in the labor movement are real, but they are not insurmountable. By recognizing the importance of women's leadership and taking concrete steps to support and empower women in the movement, we can build a labor movement that fights for everyone for generations to come. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katie. Let's hear it for President Maurice. So used to calling you still Harris. Congratulations, Katie. All right, wonderful. So I don't think I see President Nelson in the participant panel yet. I know that she has had some delays. If President Nelson, if you're here and I miss you, please speak up, but I do not see Sara. So let's go ahead and jump into our Q&A, and then if Sara Nelson is able to join, then she can say a few words. She is really excited to hear from you all too, and glad this is being recorded, and sends her solidarity, and is equally frustrated that her plane is delayed. So let's go ahead and start with some Q&A. Again, there's two ways you can ask questions. You can type your question into the chat, or you can raise your hand, and I'll try to go back and forth between the chat and those who are raising their hand. So go for it. Don't be shy. Okay, I have our first question in the chat. For Katie Maurice, how did you double your membership?
So our membership numbers came from some new affiliates in our membership. So we've recently affiliated, for example, the SCA, which is one of our largest unions in the state of Vermont, who's contributed greatly to our membership as a whole.
Great, thank you, Katie. All right, anyone else have questions? We have a whole 30 minutes together, so please ask away. Raise your hand or put your question in the chat. And I see someone helping in the chat too with some acronyms, so that's great.
There's a hand
All
up.
right, I see a hand up. Yes, thank you. So go ahead and take yourself off mute. President Tracy Little Sasanecki. Sorry if I mispronounced your name.
No, you didn't. Thank you. One of the panelists had made mention, which caught my eye, or my ear, I should say, when they said unable to register female voices. And I'm wondering, like, from the panel, is that something that most people might have experienced? And I know from listening to Secretary Davis, in terms of being a woman of color and being in a position as president, that too has a way of people not hearing. So I just wanted to hear more comments from others as related to that, if they would want to share.
I'll try to answer.
Oh, go ahead, Shellye.
I'll try to answer that for you. So I know when we have paraeducators and we sign them up to testify, especially paraeducators, most of them are women or of color. And even though they're talking and they're telling their stories, people aren't hearing them. They're not hearing them. They're not listening. They don't see them. There's this wall where they just do not exist. And that's something that we've been trying to really shatter. And I think for paraeducators, how they've been able to do that is they've come together. One voice versus 50 voices is much stronger. And people have to listen. So we're finding ways to make that happen. But I think that's what that statement means, because sometimes you're right in front of people, and if you look like me, they refuse to want to see you. Thank you.
And I was going to say, I think that's exactly what I was talking about in the story about the difficulty of bringing, getting a meeting started. I'm very deliberate about my tone of voice when I do that because of that. And also, I had an experience one time. I was on the board of our community college system, and there I was not only a woman, but also the working class person on a board of not working class people. And one time when trying to speak and getting interrupted, not once, not twice, but 3 times by men in the room, I finally just started talking and didn't stop. And everyone just kind of looked at me really like, oh my gosh, but then they realized what had happened. But I think that stuff just happens all the time. People just listen to people that they've been taught to respect. And they don't realize it's often unconscious.
Yeah, I can say a little bit more. I'm glad that's resonating. When I thought to say it, I thought, oh, I wonder if this will make sense to people. But sometimes I do. It's a facetious thing to say like, I think my voice is in a register that can't be heard, like, the opposite of a dog whistle. And as I age, even more so. So not only am I female or a woman, but I am also older. So sometimes I feel like I must be wearing an invisibility cloak. It's just amazing. I'll say something and gone, and then some, much younger man will say something as if I never said the thing I just said. And it's really interesting. I think that there's some perception of a power vacuum that, they're needed to just step right in and take over. It's really quite a phenomenon to see from this perspective. And I have been talked over, I have been interrupted, and I have been restated for. You say the thing, and somebody says, like she just said, and says the entire thing you just said. So yeah, it's quite a thing, and I'm sure the folks on the other end of that interaction don't even know it's happening.
Great. I think if anyone else would like to answer that question, please go ahead and chime in. Otherwise, I see another question in the chat from George Millett. This question is for anybody on the panel. Given your experiences, what do you think is the best way to be an ally? Something I think about and try to do a lot.
Well, I just spoke, so I was waiting, but I'll jump in. I think really, being here is one thing, and you're learning things. You're hearing what it's like for women, and stepping up when some of those things are happening, listening and understanding when women giving us an opportunity to speak about our experiences and understanding those, and helping to create a different atmosphere where everyone's voice is more equal, heard, respected, and examining the places where things that women do make you uncomfortable, or the things you notice that you may discount about it. It's the same kind of work that I think as a white person I have to do around folks of color. So very, very similar, and thanks for the question.
Yeah, when it was silent, I was just going to say, are there any men in the room who have the experience of being an ally in an effective way that you want to let us know about?
Go ahead and take yourself off mute or write in the chat. That's a great question to the audience.
Yeah, and I think that men intervening with men when they see, first you have to notice it, right? But if you notice somebody undermining, ignoring, whatever, a woman who is in a position of leadership, it takes a lot of guts to speak up right then and there and intervene with that person.
Well, maybe we'll let folks think about that, allies here, men here in the audience, and if other panelists would like to answer that question. In the meantime, please go ahead, but also welcome audience members to answer that question as well. Okay, well, seeing none, we'll move on to the next question. We have a question in the chat. I came in a little late. Apologies, no worries. Glad you're here. What is one of the biggest takeaways from your experience / trajectory? And what would you share as wisdom for those of us who are newer to labor? Go ahead, Shellye. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. What I would say to that question is you have to ask questions, you have to listen, you have to be observant, and you really have to dig deep and believe in yourself and understand what it is you want to do. What is your purpose to where you are? And once you figure out those things, the rest comes. I'm not going to say easy, the rest comes. You just have to focus on where it is you want to go and what it is you want to put in. That would be my thought.
Okay, does anyone else want to share some of their words of wisdom and some what they would say to somebody who's newer and some big takeaways?
I was gonna just say that one of the biggest takeaways I've had from my journey here is that there's no direct path. And it's really staying committed to, as Shellye said, what you believe in and what your values are. And it will lead you in this direction. I didn't grow up wanting this role necessarily, but all of my experiences kind of led me down this path to where I am.
I'd like to add something here. I was, when I realized I was going to become a co-president of my union, I was pretty scared. I guess I thought I had to do it alone and I had to know everything that I didn't know. And, you know, that it would just be like lonely at the top, you know, and a really important mentor to me told me that I will be surrounded by a team and I do not need to know everything. And I can always say, let me check with my team. And that has been the truth. And it has been a beautiful experience because I get to watch everybody's strengths come out around me. And I know what everybody's good at. And it just bolsters us all. So I guess I would say to this person who's new, you know, just remember, it's not about doing something alone. It's not about being perfect, and it's not about being a lonely leader at the top. It's just stepping up and saying yes to the things that you can do and then see what comes next.
Thank you. All right, we have another question, unless any other panelists would like to chime in on and share their words of wisdom. There'll also be time for a closing statement. So you have some time to think about that. And the invitation's still open for those allies in the audience. But we have a question from Jeremy Rathman, a question for Danielle. With your teaching, do you find more interest in the trades with the younger generation? And have you found being a female instructor is encouraging more women to explore your course and your career?
Definitely, there's a lot of interest in the trades from the younger generation, especially in Vermont. Our governor is heavily promoting career and technical education. He was in construction and has talked a lot about getting into building trades and construction related programs with career and tech ed. In terms of more women and female identifying youth coming into our programs, there is still a lot of work to do. We have over 80 students in our building trades or electrical programs combined, and only about 5 of those are women currently. So there's more work to do. It needs to be very deliberate. It needs to be targeted to even younger than high school to get young females interested in something they may not even know that they're capable of. So we're doing that work, and we're doing the work to create mentoring groups in our CTE center, our Career and Tech Ed Center, so that the girls and female identifying youth who are in these programs have a support network and that they stay. So hopefully, as the years go by, we'll see those numbers increase. That is my goal.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danielle. We have a comment, I think, in relation to the ally question from Amanda Calder of Ask Me. Amanda wrote, some of the microaggressions that make a difference include not making sexist, racist, ableist, ageist, etc. jokes, and switch from male-centered terms to gender-neutral or inclusive terms. Firefighter instead of fireman, postal carrier instead of mailman, not calling all animals he or him by default. Thank you for that, Amanda. And always looking for training opportunities from Lori Pelletier. And we have another question in the chat. I don't see any hands, so I'm going to go stick with the chat here. We have a question from Timothy Belcher. Can you talk about how the labor movement you are building is different from the movement you stepped into?
I'll start on that one. This is part of my answer of why I ran for the for this job, was that the movement I stepped into was very what sort of can be termed service oriented. You know, a business manager handled a grievance, and a lobbyist did the work at the legislature. And pretty much from the minute I got involved, I really wanted the words that we say about that we have the power in the numbers to become reality in terms of our actions. And I was doing that work in my local, and I'd been doing it more in the labor movement through the state fed for a long time. And that was part of why the opportunity to actually become the president when the former president decided not to run again was appealing to me, was to be able to move that forward on an even bigger scale. And I think it also relates to a comment one of you made earlier about a collaborative model of leadership. That it is about putting our members at the center and having that be driving things.
What I would say to Timothy is it's different because the movement that we're building now needs to include everyone. This movement needs to look like the people that it represents. It needs more women, more people of color, more young people, and that's absolutely not what I stepped into. It's starting to change, but in order for us to build this movement and move forward, we have to embrace everybody. And that embracement is going to mean that we need to change what we're doing and the way we're doing it to get the people that we need to have at the table with us, fighting with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer Davis. Would anyone else like to answer that question?
I have to say that, you know, as part of the United slate, the progressive slate that took over the Vermont AFL-CIO in 2019, I definitely inherited a progressive left-leaning labor movement in Vermont, where we've emphasized the importance of uplifting the rank and file, of building our membership, of veering away from just lobbying for Democrats in the state house. We no longer do that, or you know, we're not just an easy yes vote for the Democrats that ask for our endorsement, but instead we are focused on providing material support for our affiliates, with on-call organizers, with our worker circles throughout the state. These means for new workplaces to begin organizing, as well as support for our current affiliates.
Wonderful. Thank you, President Maurice. So we have a couple more questions in the chat, unless anyone else would like to chime in on this one. I'm going to go ahead and interrupt me if you do. So we have a question from Kevin Van Meter. Can the panelists speak to the importance of resources in fighting to use union resources, funds, staff time, etc., for leadership development, organizer trainings, and amplifying the voices of women and people from historically marginalized communities?
Well, I'll step in again. I think doing those things is one of the important building blocks in building the kind of movement that several of us just spoke to. That is what we're trying to build, because it won't be built on the inspiration of one person, and it won't be built by a few people who are good at a few things. So the resources are really make a difference, and putting those resources into a lot of people and into a diversity of people.
And I'll just add to that. I know Connecticut, we have a racial justice committee, which I'm chair of. And so we have people from all affiliates that are a part of that. So we have funds that are in that, and we've had speakers to come. We're doing a train the trainer to get people to understand what the movement is really about, for them to jump on board. We also have the Labor Leadership Academy where people come. We're in the middle of that right now. Well, third class, I think, tomorrow in Connecticut for that. So there are ways to get to where we need to go. You just have to really be creative and figure out, you know, if you're going to have fundraiser, or where those funds are coming from, or how do you get more affiliates to make these things happen. And I think it might be different depending on where you're at, but some of the things might be more of the same. And it might be really interesting for this group to get together and come up with some of those ideas. I think that would be a great move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna change the trajectory of the labor movement, which I think is what is happening in the country. It's not going to happen just all by itself, because we have 50 years or more of a conception about the labor movement that is top-down, business-oriented, service-oriented, as opposed to building power together to change conditions in the workplace and in the world, in the country, in your town, wherever. So that requires training. That requires people reflecting and sitting and thinking together with people from many different kinds of workplaces and unions, the Vermont AFL-CIO has sponsored labor notes trainings. My union partakes in those as well, like places to really think a different way. And in thinking that different way and having those places to practice, I think that's where people who have been marginalized from these movements, from this movement, you know, we know the labor movement has a terrible racial history. You know, it's excluded women as well. It's, you know, so we have a lot to overcome. And if that's going to change, it's not going to be from doing the same old things over and over again the way we know how to. So I think, yeah, it absolutely, I don't think we take enough time for training. I mean, who has time? We're working full-time jobs. Many of us doing other people's jobs because of attrition and all of that in certain workplaces. It's really hard to just do what we want to do, but that time is really well spent.
Wonderful, thank you. So unless someone else wants to jump in here, we are getting more questions, so I'm gonna read the next one. And again, if you do want to jump in, please interrupt me, it's fine, and speak over me. So Mary McDonald asked to any of the panelists, what are some specific things that you have done to encourage more union membership or union leadership among women? For example, or in other words, more progress on family leave, in platforms, things that are important to young parents, particularly young women, and has the overall support from other union members been behind that?
So Liz, that was actually the question I was answering, you know, that I just gave about that. So I'm gonna defer to other people to speak to this one.
Sure, absolutely. It is similar to other questions, but I do want to make sure that everyone's questions, while we have time, are asked. And if I don't hear from anyone on this one, I'm going to go ahead to the next. All right, moving on. I have a question from Andy Blanchett of AFSCME to any of our or all panelists. What would you say to workers who may say that gender-based discrimination doesn't exist in their labor union? And what questions would you ask workers to bring back to their locals to look more deeply into entrenched biases?
So one of the things we're doing in Connecticut with the Racial Justice Committee for the people that come from other locals, we've actually have done a survey and, you know, asked them certain questions. Do they have their own civil rights or racial justice committee? What are they doing? How do they interact with people of color, people that are different? And so that's something that we really have to get better at, because once you don't include people, and these are people that can do so much to help get this labor movement where it needs to go, once you don't include them, it's an issue. So the questions that they need to go back, they need to take some of the things back and just really start having the hard conversation. And that's been what the issue is. People really don't like to have this conversation. And until you get comfortable having it, and I don't know so much about being comfortable, but until you're willing to have it, things aren't going to really change. In order to change the path of where we are going, you have to smooth out some things from the past. You have to acknowledge them. And I think part of the issue is people are fearful of how conversations are. But I'm going to ask everybody on here to just be open and listen and start talking to people to see how people feel. Because in this movement, we actually need each other. And so we got to do better. And so I thank the person for putting that question out. Thank you.
And yeah, I appreciate that question as well. And I think the questions might be different in different unions, but you know, if you get a group of women together and just ask them what their experience has been in an environment where where either confidentiality is ensured or where they know that they're with folks who aren't going to be judging them, so they feel free to speak freely. And then there are also really simple things like who cleans up at an event when food was served.
Thank you for that. That's definitely resonates with a lot of folks. I saw a lot of heads nodding there. And thank you, Shellye, as well, for your really powerful call to listen. It's always important. That's what we do in the labor movement. We listen. So unless anybody else wants to answer that question, I'll move on to the next one.
I would just,
Oh
I just
yeah, go
would
ahead.
add, something to bring back to your local. You can ask your local if they have a women's committee. And if they don't, do they have the resources that you could start one? And then that committee can look more deeply into the questions you may have, or at least bring the women together to have each other for support and mentorship.
Thank you, Danielle. It's a very good point. It's great to have women's caucuses or committees. Okay, anyone else on that question? Okay, so Kate Marvin from Home Care United 4802 asks, I am part of a group of home care and community support professionals. We predominantly work one-on-one with clients or part of a very small care group. With such isolated populations, what communication platforms and opportunities to connect have you all had the most success with in order to support your members? And she also added that the workforce of which she is part is 70%, I'm assuming women, and our female workforce. There you go. Yes, thank you.
Liz, could you restate the question part of that? I think I didn't quite take it in.
Sure. So it was from Kate Marvin, and she's asking, with isolated populations and her workforce, which is really all over Vermont, if anyone's experienced similar kinds of workforces, what communication platforms have been really helpful in having you all communicate and stay together, and probably also making sure women are part of that conversation.
I think, so I saw somewhere in the chat, Amanda Calder, I believe, mentioned how in our local at AFSCWA 1674, we've been relying on Zoom largely to have our monthly union meetings and any other sort of like stewards meetings or executive board meetings. And we made that conscious choice to continue on Zoom after the pandemic restrictions were lifted, because it made it incredibly accessible to everyone. I know at Howard Center, we have locations that are all across the county as well as in Rutland. So for folks who are commuting really far, like, myself, I have a solid 40-minute commute to work, but and folks who have families as well, it makes it far more accessible to regularly communicate with your fellow workers and reduces that barrier to travel. As much as we also understand the need for that in-person camaraderie, it does make it far more accessible to everyone, no matter what their home situation is like or their location, to make it much easier to collaborate and problem solve together on Zoom.
Thank you, President Harris. And I just saw Sara Nelson enter the room. So Sara Nelson, President Sara Nelson, thank you so much for joining us after a long flight with delays. We really appreciate you being here. We shared a bit about you already when we started this, but we'd love to hear from you and your journey to becoming president of AFA-CWA and part of the AFL-CIO Executive Council, maybe some challenges you faced as a woman in this position or in the airline industry. I'm sure that, I know there are many, and also any thoughts you may have on how we can develop more women as leaders in this movement. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thanks, Liz. You're a real hero to me. I would just stop somewhere at one of these gates and talk to you, but we have all of our mobilization tools heading to baggage claim, and we don't want to miss it. So we're on our way for a mobilization training for the United Contract Bargaining. So it's really great to be here with all of you. I've actually been listening for about the last 10 minutes. The first thing I'll just say is that absolutely we need to get women together to be able to talk with each other and share our experiences and hear each other's voices. But I also just want to caution us that women's committees have been used to set our issues to the side too. So if we're going to do that, we need to make sure that those issues are coming back to the center. I actually, when I was asked what committees I wanted to join, when I became a member of the AFL Executive Council, I did not choose the Women's Committee. They were shocked, and I've been recruited many times to try to be on the Women's Committee, and I won't do it because that committee is used to keep the issues of women to the side. And in fact, actually, I was told a few years ago, well, we're going to take this resolution for women's power, women's reproductive rights, women's equality through the political committee so that it has more clout. Each one of the executive council committees is supposed to have the same clout, but even the women who were on the committee were feeling that it was going to be cast aside. And if we're approaching things that way, that's what's going to continue to happen. So instead of moving forward and understanding that actually the marginalization of women, sexism, discrimination, rape, all of it is really about undercutting the working class, and the working class has to understand that. In an organizing drive, you look for your leaders, you look to build up your majority, and the corporate elite figured out a long time ago that if, Taylor, I'm going to take a seat over here, that if they can lop off half of the working class in one fell swoop, which is what that Dobbs decision did, even more so than the fact that we haven't been able to actually recognize women as equal in the United States, that this is an attempt to take half of the working class off the table right away, to undercut our power, to give the boss the ability to control us. Yes, you're right, Liz. I actually, when the Me Too movement broke, here I was, the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, with 80% of the members of my union who were women. The percentage has actually dropped a little bit since then. And the only union, I believe, that was founded by women and has been consistently run by women for all of our existence, almost 80 years now. So when the Me Too movement broke, we had years and years and years of trying to fight through discrimination just to make our jobs a career, just to make this a job that anyone with the heart of a flight attendant could have. And that meant that our jobs were undervalued all that time. In fact, the very first day on the job, a flying partner of 35 years, and this is 1996, so she started 35 years before that. Imagine what she went through. And she pulled me aside and she said, listen, management thinks of us as their wives or their mistresses, and in either case, they hold us in contempt. Woo, that was a lot at 23, fresh out of company training. But then she went on to say something that really resonated with me. She said, your worth is with your fellow flying partners. And if we stick together, there's nothing we can accomplish. And that was good news. But it was also true. It was also true that the members of my union never believed that anyone was going to open a door for us, that no one was ever going to set out a chair for us to sit at a table. We often had to fight our brothers in the movement, right at the airlines, who would say that we were going to take a part of their pie, or even in the ESOP in 1994, the employee stock ownership program at United Airlines. At the very last minute, we didn't join that because I'm not going to say which unions, but a union representing pilots and a union representing mechanics said that they didn't want AFA to have a seat on the board because women shouldn't be in the boardroom. And so we did not do that. Now, luckily, that means that we also didn't lose all of our retirement that they lost in the bankruptcy, because all that stock went up in flames when United Airlines went into bankruptcy. But we always had to fight just to be where we were, just to make the point, just to be able to negotiate a contract, a pension plan, all of those things. And so, and we kept fighting. We kept fighting for flight attendant certification, so that it was required actually that we're on planes. Planes do not take off if pilots don't fly them. They also do not take off if flight attendants are not staffing them. And we made that very clear during the government shutdown in 2019. And so when the Me Too movement broke, I said to our comms department, I said, get ready, we're going to start getting calls right away. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, they're going to be looking around and they're going to say, who has been sexually harassed in their careers and can talk about that. And trust me, they're going to call us. And I was right. And so I knew my own experience that I had never talked about, all the times that I had been touched incorrectly, all the times that I had felt unsafe on a layover because a passenger had followed me there, or a fellow crew member, or the insinuations from management about my appearance, all of those things, and those words that rang true when I got to the bargaining table, especially from my flying partner that first week on the job. And so I knew all of that, and here I was leading this union, and I got out in the crew rooms to talk to other flight attendants, and we did a big survey too, a big online survey. But I wanted to get out and talk with people to make sure that my experience was also their experience. And I remember being in this crew room in Fort Lauderdale with flight attendants who were 6 months on the job to 30 years on the job. And they all said to me that, well, I'm in the middle of explaining. Hey, Taylor, can you help him? Okay. So I must look like I have the answers. Anyway, so I was in the middle of this discussion with my fellow flying partners and hearing their stories, and whether they had been 6 months on the job or 30 years on the job, they were all talking about being touched inappropriately or being or something happening on the plane. And I said, what do you do when that happens? And they all said, well, we tell them to stop. And it was like every time. And then the conversation got real, and it got real. And they said, no, sometimes we have to de-escalate. And the best way to de-escalate is just to let it brush off. Sometimes when it's so inappropriate, or it's a fellow employee, like we don't want to ruin their careers. We know no one's going to take us seriously anyway. And so we're going to get branded as bad guy. Or we're so understaffed now that there's so much to do that we don't even have time to deal with it. We have to just keep doing our jobs. Or we're afraid that the passenger is going to give us a bad report and we're on probation, and so we're going to get fired, or we don't yet have our union and we're going to get fired. And so they were all talking about this, and I asked them more about reporting. And finally, one of them said, I'm 6 months on the job, and I grew up in a very small town Christian family. And I was shocked actually with what I experienced on the job when I first came here. But then I came to learn that it was really just part of the job. And there I was, president of the union, taking really in that, like, fundamentally the safety and sense of security of people that I represented. We hadn't finished our job. We hadn't made it safe for them. We hadn't made it a place where they could feel free and have equal standing to be able to speak up about what makes them uncomfortable and what they don't want to do and how they don't want someone to touch them. And that was really painful. And we got to work really defining that. We used the survey results and pushed this, and we called on the industry. I wrote a letter to every CEO the next day to say, you need to denounce the industry's sexist past. Because when people get on a plane, they think, oh yeah, like flight attendants in go-go boots, and they remember the ads, I'm sure I'll fly me all the way to Mexico, and all of that. And they just think they're in a different space. They also drink ginger ale and order tomato juice when they don't have that anywhere else in their lives, and they touch the flight attendants. And so I said, you got to denounce the sexist past. You got to call out a zero tolerance policy, and you have to lift up the role of flight attendants as aviation's first responders. And only 3 airline CEOs did it, but where they did it, literally the next day, we got a report of a sexual assault on board that was reported, that the pilots took seriously, reported to the ground. The FBI showed up. That person was arrested, hauled away. That crew was empowered. That story went around the airline. And all that it took, actually, was that chain of command from the CEO down saying, this was a serious thing. There was a zero tolerance policy. Everyone has to address it, and it has to change. And so we made those demands. And I think sometimes as women, we forget to make the demands because we think no one's going to listen to us. We think no one's going to take us seriously. We think we have to build, 100% consensus before we can take those issues forward. We're willing to take on someone else's issues or, do something that's good for the greater good. I think that what we do have to remember is that if we're not standing up for ourselves and we're not making demands for women's rights, we are undercutting the value of the entire working class and the ability to fight the corporate class, because this is their number one tactic: to divide, demoralize, and make us feel like we don't have worth to even stand up for our own human rights. So, Liz, I'm just going to leave it at that. But I'm so sorry that I missed the rest of the conversation. I'm super happy to be here with all of you. I'm super happy that you invited me. And I love my sisters, and those of you who are forming those women's committees, which is really important for all the reasons that you said. Make sure that when you're doing that, that there is a path to bring that back in to the general session, so that everyone understands that these are issues not just for women, but for everyone, and priority issues for the working class.
Thank you so much, President Nelson. We all look to you as an inspiration in the labor movement, and sharing all of your experiences and how you actually effectively made women feel safe and respected in the workplace. And I really appreciate that. I don't know if you have a few extra minutes or you have to go to your mobilization, but since you are here, maybe if anyone has a few questions for Sara, or I can just read the other questions I haven't asked yet in the chat. Please take yourselves off mic or put those questions in the chat. We do have 2 questions that came in while you were speaking, Sara. So we have one, we were talking a bit about cleaning up after events. And so Vivian Nisali Ayatsi, Local 11, it's not sure if what the right words are to present this question, but is it a weakness to be the woman who always jumps in, for example, to clean up and also be a leader? Any advice on that?
So I don't think it's a weakness, but I do think it's important to think like organizers and to ask people to join you and not just do it and stay quiet. So that's all I would say about that, is just, invite people to join you. Hey, a lot of hands make for light work. Come join me.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to answer that? Okay. Well, hearing none, please do interrupt me. We have another question in the chat from Ann Nguyen, MEA, Massachusetts Education Association. Thank you all for a wonderful discussion. We can all agree that structural sexism and gender biases negatively affect women, female workers, and organizers everywhere. In your experience, have there been opportunities to engage in conversations or collaboration with foreign female union leaders, organizers, members? If yes, do you find those opportunities helpful in strengthening the movement at home? If not, could such opportunities be helpful, and how might we create more of them in the future? Thank you.
Speaking a little,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, nice to see you, Sara. Welcome. It's nice to see you here. I was going to say that a little more generically, that we've had some opportunities to just have exchanges with foreign union members at all, just to learn how differently unions function and workplaces function in other countries, and it's been extremely valuable. And that's part of why I'm really excited about your new role in the Bureau of Labor Education and the opportunities for those conversations with your perspective that we'll be able to have. So I'm looking forward to talking with you about that more, and just think we should look for those opportunities when we have folks who can offer perspectives outside of the ones that we've been able to have previously.
Okay. Sara, did you want to jump in on that one, or I know you were for a second there?
No, I mean, I think that I'll just say that the opportunity to work with flight attendants around the world and other aviation workers, we have the International Transport Workers Federation that I'm very much involved in, and it's a wide spectrum. So it's everything from fighting with flight attendants in Hong Kong to raise the retirement age, the requirement to quit when they were 40. Or on the other spectrum, really learning from the social protections in Europe that give women the ability to actually be off with their children, breastfeed, continue to be paid in most cases, but also talking with them about the fact that those things are not enough. We have to talk about how we can bring the leadership back into our unions and into our workspaces, because oftentimes those gaps in our careers can also be a gap in our union leadership experience. And that is often why then you'll have the perpetuation of just men in these positions. So it's not enough to just have the social protections. We also have to have the leadership protections and the ability to be there at the table. And there's so much more work to do on this. We have so far to go on it, but I am always encouraged and inspired by the work of my sisters around the world. And so we should do a lot more of it. And I don't have a lot more to add right now, other than that international solidarity is the way that we're going to beat back multinational corporations who are, taking over our world and leaving us on a burning earth while they head off to the moon in rockets, or hope that the destruction of the earth doesn't come to New Zealand and can't move across moats that they're building around their castles. So so anyway, we have a lot more work to do, and I think that more discussion among women around the world is the way to go. And oftentimes we're also the storytellers and the history holders of our culture and our people and who we are. Hearing those stories from oftentimes the people who are watching what's happening, because the path for us to get results is not clear. Women have to get very creative about that. And so oftentimes we have a perspective that men don't bring, because they don't have to look at the world in the same way. They don't have to analyze the world in the same way. They don't have to pay attention to other people in order to actually find a way to get results for themselves and their families. And so I just think we have to do a lot more talking to each other. We have so much to learn from our sisters.
Wonderful, thank you. Anyone else before we let everyone have a couple of minutes for a closing statement. I know it's 7:33, a little bit past the hour that this event was scheduled for. I'm glad you're still sticking around and engaged in this conversation. But I'll invite anyone who wants to say anything more on solidarity or working with women across borders. If not, then please, panelists, as you see fit, share your final thoughts and words.
Liz, I just want to say that "Don't be ladylike" is the perfect quote from Mother Jones. And, you know, she said, Rockefeller and the Gang of Thieves made the ladies and God Almighty made women. You know, don't be ladylike when you walk into that fight. And Mother Jones also said, you must fight. So it's really important to take that in. I will often open that up, especially even when I'm in a room full of men, and I will say my name. I will say what union I'm from and who I represent. And then I will give that quote and I will say, and I am here to speak as a woman. Don't call me a lady. So I think that I would encourage other people to just take that up and do that. And we should not let people call us ladies. We're here to fight for what we love. That's each other. That's our families. That's our unions. And we're here to lead the world forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sara. Thank you again so much for joining us. Let's hear it one more time for Sara, and we'll hear from the rest of our panelists too and their final thoughts.
I'll just say this is such a great opportunity to do, and even in answer to the question that Ann asked about how can we have more of them, you know, a panel like this does give an opportunity for us to hear each other's perspectives and experience and get fresh ideas. And so I really appreciate you bringing us together, Liz, and it's really been wonderful to hear from all of the leaders and the great questions, and thank you.
Wonderful. Secretary Treasurer Davis, I see your hand is up, so hopefully you're ready to share your final thoughts.
Thank you, Liz. In conclusion, I would like to underscore the vital importance of every woman's voice in the labor union. Let's ensure that women from all walks of life are not just heard, but cherished and uplifted as we strive for equality and inclusivity. Let's draw inspiration from the words of trailblazing women who have left marks on the labor movement. In the words of Rose Scheiderman, a labor union leader, what the woman who labors wants is the right to live, not simply exist. And let us also remember the words of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, a labor activist who famously proclaimed, "I stand for the solidarity of labor and the dignity of the worker." Thank you for lending your ears and your support in advancing women's leadership in the labor movement. Let's unite in our diversity, amplify our voices, and together build a brighter future for all. I want to thank our moderator, Liz, and team for creating a space for this important and necessary discussion, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer Davis. Let's hear it one more time for Shellye.
Ooh.
Yeah, come off mute if you want to share too.
Yeah, woo woo.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Thank you for organizing this, Liz. You know, as a rank and file member of AFSCME and president of the Vermont State Labor Council, I can say that there's just nothing more exhilarating than democratizing your workplace. And I truly look forward to seeing more women in leadership roles in the labor movement. You know, it's our time, and it's a time that we take a seat at the table.
Thank you so much, President Maurice. Let's hear it for Katie. Woo woo!
Woo!
Yeah, Katie.
And I'll go next. Thank you, Liz, again for organizing this. This has been pretty incredible. It reminds me that I'm not alone. I do have two other amazing women on the executive committee in Vermont AFL-CIO, but we are also not alone. Meeting some other sisters from other labor councils. I'm just so happy and encouraged to have met you both virtually and look forward to sharing our success and making those demands and offering mentorship and creating a stronger, more equitable labor movement. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Secretary Treasurer Bombardier. Let's hear it for Danielle. Woo!
Woo!
All right. Ellen and Cynthia, you're the last two. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, for once, I'm a little bit speechless. Doesn't happen a lot. That it was amazing to hear all of you, to see all of you who showed up. I am really honored to be in this room with all of you. I'm honored to be working with the other two women on our executive committee. I hope we can move mountains, but we're not doing it alone. That's the beauty of it all. You know, I look forward to just continuing to build a leadership that allows everybody to bloom. You know, whether it's somebody who just shows up at a bargaining session to observe, or somebody who grabs a bullhorn, or somebody who bakes the cookies, that guy also needs to bloom. You know, and just watching people just stretch themselves in a place that's a community that is welcoming and inclusive, and that we build power together. And in doing that, we develop trust, and then we build more power. And that's, I think, the way we move mountains. And that's the way I hope we do it from now on, especially with women really stepping in. So I'm really grateful. Thank you, Liz, for pulling this together. It's amazing. And just so happy to be here with all of you tonight. Solidarity, y'all.
Thank you so much, Executive Vice President Kaye. Let's hear it for Ellen. Woo woo!
Solidarity forever.
All right, Cynthia, that leaves you.
Well, I actually already wrapped, and I just wrapped An's question into my final words. But so I'll just say again how great it was to be together with all of you and have these thoughts, and newly invigorated to build that union movement and labor movement where everybody gets to bloom.
Hey,
Wonderful.
Liz, can I add one thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Had some from the chat here. Jeremy Rathbun wrote, my daughter, Jenny, is that right? Who is watching with me, just wanted to say she thinks it's very cool you all work so hard to get in these positions of leadership, and she hopes she can be like you all someday. I think that's a good way to end, huh?
It's a really good way to end. And thank you for sharing that, Jeremy. And if I didn't get to your questions in the chat near the end, apologies, we ran out of time, but this doesn't have to be the end of this conversation. And I hope you will take a moment to check out the evaluation form and let us know what you may want to see next. And we can host more of these or in different forms and keep on talking. And so please do let us know. And Sara took the words of Mother Jones away. That is the title of this event, Do Not Be Ladylike. So I hope this evening inspired you to fight like a woman. And thank you again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening. One more round of applause and woots for all our panelists, right?
Woo, woo. Thank you, Liz. Good night, everybody.
Woo, woo.
You.
Everyone.
Everyone.